Today, I want to talk to you about the reading as we're reading through Scripture, following the Read Scripture program in the app from Genesis chapters 19 through 21. And we deal with some difficult content, stories that we don't like. And I want to talk about a couple of things and then kind of share my 2 cents of advice. So in this story, there's in this section, there's a story recorded about the destruction of these cities called Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's a story that's somewhat well known within people who study the Bible within Christianity and those that look at the Old Testament. And in modern Christianity, there's some debate about the reason that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed and kind of the surrounding connection about what was the cause, right? What was the destruction? And we have it recorded here. And I don't really want to get into the debate, but I'm going to share with you a text that is oftentimes quoted as a reason for the destruction. And I think it's accurately quoted because the Bible talks about this. So in Ezekiel chapter 16, there's a prophecy going on. Ezekiel's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that would come much later. And if you remember, as we're looking at the Bible as a unified story that leads to Jesus, the Bible has tracked even to this point what happens, what are the results when man takes power, right, and takes and says, I'm going to decide by my choice, right, disconnected from God, and I'm going to rule the way I want to rule. And we've seen the destruction that this caused, right? We've seen the things like the flood and people treating each other's property and the violence and all of this going, right? And this results of humans saying, I'm going to do it my way, and how we really are bad at that. And so we've seen that to this point. So that's being tracked, and then all the way up in Ezekiel, it's talking about, man, this is the brokenness that has happened of the people that God has been working with and God's been faithful in his covenant to, but these people have done some horrible things. And so this is what Ezekiel says in chapter 16 of Ezekiel with this prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem. So there's this connection going on, but he mentions Sodom. And so he says this in verses 49 and 50 of Ezekiel 16. It says, Sodom's sin were pride, gluttony, and laziness, while the poor and needy suffered outside her door. Verse 50, she was proud and committed detestable sins, so I wiped her out, as you have seen. And so we see that Ezekiel tracks in his prophecy that Sodom has this issue in how the people of Sodom had this issue in how they treated others, particularly those who were in need, those who didn't have much. And they were proud, and they ignored this justice. And the Bible talks about this, and the people of God are to bring justice to the needy and the poor, to help those who don't have, to stand for equality and righteousness. And there are people that say, of course, that's the reason. And I think you can't argue that. You can't argue away from that. And this comes down to the discussion of whether the destruction of Sodom had anything to do with sexual perversion. And we see that in verse 50, it mentions detestable acts, and people argue that that's a part. And so that's in the argument within the religious community is whether part of the reason for the punishment, the judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah that we read in Scripture had to do with their sexual perversion, them wanting to pull out and sexually assault these two men that Lot had taken in, and then Lot offers his daughters, and really a disturbing story. And I think you can't rule out personally that it was part of it, but it's more of an attitude. And I would say an attitude of misuse, or that someone else is less than me and that I don't have to help other people, right? This attitude of superiority, it will breed all kinds of stuff. And one of those things is that I will want to use other people for my sexual pleasure. And this brings us to really an uncomfortable reality of what we've just read in Genesis chapters 19 through 21, because there is sexual assault is tracked in this. Both the endeavor of the people of Sodom, right? And then the reality of Lot being sexually assaulted by his daughters, which we tend to not think of that, but that's what happened. And I think we need to remember, right, that the Bible records things that are difficult for us because humans do difficult things. And it's good for us to acknowledge that, but to acknowledge a caring God within that, right? And a God who works with broken people like us who do these type of things. If you happen to be reading this along and you have children, right? I don't know what the age are, right? You're reading through the Bible. This can be a difficult time. And so I want to share with you a little bit of advice. First thing is that if you're uncomfortable talking about this, look, there are resources online. How do I talk to my kids about these things? I think there's good stuff because I'm not an expert and I don't want you to follow me. But I will say this, my opinion is that if you think your kids are too young to talk about sexuality, I think you're wrong. And I'm not saying you should talk to them about sexual assault, but I think you should go back and look at how Genesis chapter 1 and 2 describe the interaction, right? What is the picture the Bible gives of perfection? And we should always be having a conversation about what is taught as good, right? And it's a unselfish care for one another, production of life. We're part of the image of God, right? And this is a beautiful thing that I think we should always be in that conversation with our children, regardless of their age. Now, when it comes to the perversion, right, and assault that we see here, I think that's also a discussion that we should start having fairly young with our kids, that they would know about their bodies, that they would know what is appropriate, right? And if someone says something or does something to them that makes them feel uncomfortable, they should recognize what that is and be able to talk about it, right, and share, because we live in a world where it's a sick world and this stuff happens. So I encourage you to have those conversations. If you say, I really think my kids are too young to be talking about kind of the assault side of this, that's a decision you have to make. But I think you should be talking to them about the picture of pure sexuality that we see in the beginning of Genesis with God and humanity as a part of the image of God. It's a beautiful thing, right? And so it's talking about recognizing what the pure picture is. It's like the counterfeiting, right? You want to know what the real looks like so that you recognize the counterfeit. But when your kids, unfortunately at this age, the viewing of sexually explicit material for children is extremely young. So I would say if you have kids that are in first, second, and third grade, you should start having these conversations with them about how to react if they feel uncomfortable and things like that, and with their body. For sure, by the time they're in fifth grade, I think you got to have a conversation real bluntly about the things that people do to each other in this world. I wish that were not the case, but that's my 2 cents on a difficult stories that we wish weren't true. That the Bible records about humans doing things to each other. And the beautiful thing that I like in all this, and all this dysfunction, we didn't even cover all of it in these chapters, is that God is still faithful to his promise. And the child, which there's a lot of Jesus connection to the birth of Isaac, the promised blessing, it comes. And we as humans are struggling in this world, but there's a God who says, I care so much about you. And I speak blessing into your life. And not because of your faithfulness or your mastery, but because I love you. And this story continues to lead to Jesus. And as we lead up, we'll see some powerful Jesus metaphors in these next chapters. I'm excited about that. Pray that you are blessed. Read through Scripture, interact with the document. It's a unified story that leads to Jesus, and I hope that you are enjoying it and continue on. Share it with your friends, share it with your family. May you be blessed. We'll see you next time.